Hey guys, so I wasn't gonna do intros and outros for this episode because I like to mix it up a little bit and not always do them. And then I remembered I should probably have a small disclaimer for this episode. It's a fantastic one, but we also talk about what happens to a body when it dies, and that might irk some people out. So I thought I'd give you a little heads up. I think it's fantastic, and I think you're really going to love the episode, but I didn't want to get someone like, I'm traumatized from hearing about insects crawling in my ears or whatever. So that, and I happen to be I'm in northern Wisconsin right now, taking my hair's all in my eyes. I just got off of an ATV, taking my first trip since COVID, having a lovely time. I'm here with my wonderful assistant, Rihanna, who you can follow Hippie Rich on Instagram, and her boyfriend, one of my best friends, Steve Gillespie. Super funny guy. You should follow him as well. I need to say that because Rihanna's holding the camera right now, so I gotta say all these things. But it's kind of an early birthday thing for me. So if you're wondering what to get your favorite podcaster or top 100 podcaster for their 41st birthday, which is May 25th, it's the same thing any podcaster wants. It's a favorable, thoughtful review on iTunes or Stitcher or wherever you podcast. Give your favorite podcasters the gift of favorable algorithm engagement. Because when you write something like that, it's not just the number of downloads a podcast gets. It's also when you write it, other people like you, other people that like the sort of things that you like are going to get recommended my podcast. So it's a good way to help a small podcast like mine grow and grow the community. So thank you guys for listening and watching, and enjoy this episode.
Are we?
Yes.
Where are we?
Here.
Why are we here? Not entirely clear. We are misfits thrust into existence by random chance, with no hints at all as to how we're supposed to make sense of it all. It's immensely bizarre. Here we are.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Here We Are podcast. My name is Shane Mauss. Today's guest is Associate Professor in the Biosystems Engineering and Soil Science Department at the University of Tennessee, and is also part of the One Health initiative that we've been plugging from time to time on this show. We're been trying to get about one guest on a month, because a big fan of what they're doing and all the people they've been sending my way. And today I'm talking with Jennifer DeBruyn is joining me today. Jennifer, how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
And it's DeBruyn, right? Did I nail it?
You nailed it. That's DeBruyn.
Oh, first try. Yes. Usually listeners have to hear. I always tell listeners how many takes it took me to get the intro right, just so they know. Someone's tracking the data somewhere. But nailed on the first try. I think that's good luck, but I don't know. I don't think it's ever happened before. But I very much appreciate you joining me today.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right. So, easiest way to usually get started, and especially because I think some of the stuff that you have to talk about is maybe a little, probably stuff we haven't talked about on the show before, and so there might be some 101 type stuff that myself and the listeners would benefit from. But why don't you give a little bit of your background?
Sure. So I'm an environmental microbiologist. So I study microbes in all kinds of environments. And one of the great things about that field is it means I can work in a lot of different areas. So I actually started working in lake systems. As an undergraduate student, I was doing research on the Great Lakes. When I got into graduate school, I started working on microbes and sediments that were degrading pollutants. And then when I started a faculty job, I started getting more into soil microbiology and understanding microbes in more terrestrial systems. And from there, I got connected with researchers at the Anthropology Research Facility here at the University of Tennessee. They are better known as the Body Farm here at the University of Tennessee, where they study human decomposition. And it was just through some early conversations with some of the faculty there, they were noticing that there were some patterns in decomposition that didn't quite make sense. And I thought it might have something to do with the microbes in the system. So they were chatting with me, asked me what I knew about microbes associated with human decomposition, which was nothing at the time, but it was intriguing enough to me that I started looking into it, started doing a little research, realizing at the time we knew very little about that field. I mean, we knew microbes were involved in decomposition, but we didn't know which ones or how or even why they were important. And so that became kind of my first research project as a brand new faculty member. And I've been working in that area ever since.
That's life takes a lot of strange paths, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Never intended to get into that field.
Never, as a little girl, you never once thought, maybe I'll get into how human bodies decompose. Never,
No.
It never crossed your mind? Interesting.
No, I was always interested in environmental science.
Yeah.
And in fact, I was lucky enough to grow up in one of the world's premier environmental science field sites. I grew up at a place called Environmental Lakes Area. So
Where's that?
This is way up in Canada, northern Ontario, middle of nowhere. Kenora, Ontario is probably the closest city. My father was a field biologist there. So I spent my summers at this research site. And this site is famous for doing whole lake manipulation studies. And they've just contributed, astoundingly to our understanding of limnology and aquatic science. So as a little girl, I sort of remember running around the lakes and the boats and the science equipment and the labs and the phytoplankton and zooplankton nets and all of these things. So I kind of, was attuned to that. But the body decomposition stuff, that was something that I was not expecting or thinking about at all as I was preparing for this career.
So yeah, I mean, I'm gonna get angry emails if I don't ask you. The Walking Dead show, how accurate are they? Nailing it? Are they? How's the makeup person doing? Are they consulting with people like you before they do?
So I have never watched it. I'm a little embarrassed to admit that, but I've never.
Oh, you do not need to be embarrassed for not having seen The Walking Dead. You could watch season 1 and be done with it.
Okay.
For sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe at some point, maybe I'll put it on the list. No, I've never been into crime novels. Never watched CSI or any of those shows.
Yeah. So what? So you're an environmental microbiologist. What did you discover about human decomposition that was kind of relevant to your field? Why did they bring you in?
Yeah, so it was. It became fascinating to me from an ecology or an environmental perspective. Until I had actually seen a body decomposing, I hadn't really thought very much about it. And I think one of the things that struck me was just how alive the system looked. You have this dead body, but all around it, there's all kinds of insects. There's fly larvae, maggots. There's movement, there's sounds, there's smells from all of these other organisms that are making a living off of this one dead resource. It really is kind of a little pop-up ecosystem in and of itself. And I just became fascinated by this kind of transient resource in an environment, a dead thing that's hosting all of these other organisms making a living off of it, and then going away. So that was what kind of captured me and made me very interested in it.
Well, I think if you're in a soil science department, you're somewhat familiar with the idea of things falling over and on top of the soil stuff, and probably being fairly good for it in a lot of ways.
Right. I've spent a lot of my career thinking about decomposition generally. So previously I was thinking about breakdown of pollutants. And this to me just seemed like the next sort of interesting breakdown problem. And I think one of the things that makes it so interesting when you think about it in terms of ecosystems is just how concentrated and how short-term it is as a nutrient source. So we in our bodies, we actually have a lot of nutrients, particularly nitrogen, that the environment, especially terrestrial environments, is usually starved for. Plants are usually nitrogen limited. And so you get all of this big bucket of nitrogen that we've been accumulating our whole lives, dumps into a single spot.
Yeah.
And within, in summer months, within the matter of weeks to a month, it's pretty much all redistributed into the environment.
That's a great week for soil when something keels over on it, but you can't count on that. The chances of something walking by again and keeling over in that same spot, that's just, you hit the jackpot once in a while.
Right. It's transient and it's patchy.
Interesting.
Yeah. And I mean, we know that this is important in other environments too. One great example is whale falls. So when a big whale dies in the ocean, sinks to the bottom of the seafloor, where there's very little nutrients, very little carbon coming in, not a lot of action going on until that whale hits. And it just feeds this whole ecosystem and whole succession of organisms that feast, make a living off of that, recycle those nutrients back into the environment.
Life will make use of everything. It's amazing. Yes. You can never have a whale plop down in this one spot in the ocean in hundreds of years, and then one plops down and they're like, we know just what to do with this. This is it just has at it. Nothing goes to waste.
Yes, exactly.
So this is a rather, every time there's a subject that's like this kind of far outside of my wheelhouse, I'm always a little bit intimidated and experiencing a bit more imposter syndrome and everything than usual. And I'm wondering if maybe could you give us like a little 101 just environmental microbiology, like some of the basics. If you're going into a 101 course, what are some of the things that you're going to learn in that first semester?
Well, when we think about, I'll scale it back from environmental and focus a little bit more on soil systems, because that's mostly what we work on.
Sure.
But yeah, if you break it down to its fundamentals, soil is a really, really complex environment or a habitat for life, okay? So the first thing to understand about microbes is that they're dealing with an environment that has solids, liquids, and gases. It's got this complex structure of pore spaces that you can kind of move around some of them, but maybe not if you're too big. And it's got a lot of heterogeneity, so a lot of variability. Over very short distances in soils, you can go from having fully oxygenated gases or atmosphere to fully anoxic or no oxygen within millimeters in a soil system. So there's a lot of steep gradients or a lot of variation over very short distances in soil. So microbes that have figured out how to be successful in soil are incredibly diverse in order to take advantage of all those different nutritional or physical habitats in soil. So they take advantage of all these little pore spaces and can squeeze in there to avoid predation. They're very dependent on water in the soil for moving things around because they may not be able to move around very much. And then because of these gradients that I mentioned, you get a huge diversity of metabolisms. So some microbes need to use oxygen, aerobic. Some of them can't tolerate oxygen at all, the anaerobes, and will actually die in the presence of oxygen. And others are somewhere in between, and maybe they can switch between the two. So they've evolved all these metabolisms that allow them to use resources and make a living in ways that we don't see in higher plants and animals. And that contributes just to this phenomenal diversity of organisms that we can see in soil. The other thing about soil life is that it's mostly microbial. And people kind of underappreciate the amount of life that we do have in soils just because we can't see a lot of it. Soil is opaque and these things are microbes. And so you don't really think about it when you're walking around, how much life is actually below your feet.
Yeah, so all of this diversity, the way that you go through some you go on a hike or something like that, or you visit the Amazon or some place kind of less touched by modern civilization, and I imagine you see quite a bit of diversity just from within a walking distance from one another, even much shorter than that. And then you have humans all of a sudden that kind of figure out these amazing tool makers that are so adaptive to environments. They're actually able to then adapt environments to kind of suit their needs or try. And there's all of these kind of these unexpected consequences to doing that. What happens once you start having something like farmland where you're there's some deforestation, you're kind of getting this one huge stretch of land that's, I imagine there's still some diversity, but a lot more uniform than you would see in an area that humans haven't touched. What are some of the implications once you start doing? I hear about soil losing its nutrients over time, and can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So much of soil life is dependent on the organic matter coming in. That's kind of what's feeding all of the food webs and organisms. And so they're very much dependent on plants or animals. We were talking about, dead animals or humans as resources, but plant matter is a large part of the inputs. And so if you have a greater amount and diversity of those organic inputs into soil, you're going to have a greater diversity of organisms using those. So when you talk about deforestation, if you're taking away plant communities, or if you're switching from a diverse multi-species plant community to a monoculture, you're definitely going to lose soil diversity because you're reducing the different types of food sources that they have. So you're going to select for a few specialists that happen to be really good at eating that plant's molecules, and the rest are going to go away.
So what are some of the common consequences of that?
A loss of diversity of the soil.
Yeah.
So the microbes in soil are really key to cycling carbon and nutrients and other elements through the soil. And when you start losing diversity, you start to lose some of those really key functions that the microbes are performing. They'll also do things like degrade pollutants or help resist pathogens or pests. And if you start taking away members of the community that are helping with those functions, you're going to start to slowly lose some of those functions.
And So is there anything as we are becoming more and more aware of some of the effects, as we now have soil science didn't exist at the advent of agriculture. There were a lot of things people couldn't possibly wrap their head around, the impact of what was going to happen over time of planting the same crop in these monocultures over years and decades. What kind of modern tools are used in agriculture today to offset some of the negative impacts of that loss of diversity?
Yeah, so there's a movement towards using better agricultural practices that do help maintain and even help build diversity in soil. I think we're starting to recognize just how important soil microbes are to the health and functioning of soil. So some of those practices can be using cover crops. So rather than leaving your soil bare in between your May crop, you plant something over the winter. That helps keep the soil covered, helps keep soil in place, and it's providing new plants and a diversity of plants, more resources for those microbes, more organic matter into the soil, so you can build that healthy soil community. Some people are switching to more conservative tillage practices. So aggressive tilling of the soil can break up aggregates or the clumps in soil, and soil microbes make their homes in between these aggregates. That's kind of like their house. That's their shelter. So when you start destroying that soil structure, you're basically destroying the little habitat that all these organisms live in. Soil gets compacted, organisms are unhappy, and you lose diversity. So using either no tillage or a more conservative tilling approach can help maintain that soil structure and keep all these microbes' homes intact.
Okay, so you don't just what is that? How do you have a more conservative? Because I can picture the soil being tilled. You have this nice row being dug out, and then you see the seeds going, and then the nice perfect rows of corn come out. Is there what do you lose some of that perfect kind of organized linear rows of things if you're looking to plant a little more naturally, I guess?
It definitely. So farms, when you start to adopt these more, I would say soil friendly approaches, definitely start to look less neat. They don't have that perfect like bare soil with perfect rows of corn in, because cover crops, they kind of look like weeds. And if you have multi-species, you can have all different heights, and so it doesn't have that like perfect homogeneous look anymore. But there's ways to till or to till more minimally. That's you can still put rows of crops in. So disking is one way, which rather than sort of pushing and turning the soil over, just sort of cuts into the soil so that you can plant. So that would be one approach. So
there's. I probably don't have that many farmer listeners, but I probably have a lot of people that have a yard. What's going on with yards? Usually I talk with environmental scientists. They're like, yards, boo. The idea of having this leave it to beaver, each neighbor is competing to have their perfect, lush, green, one species of grass that's the exact right height that we've all agreed on is the perfect height for grass to be. And what's up with that? You against it? Am I right in guessing you like throw a little diversity in those yards? Maybe find some new ways to advertise our landscape?
Yeah, yards are kind of a diversity desert.
It's a thing.
I mean, they are. It's a single species of grass, and they're usually non-native grasses that are shallow rooting. And so you're only getting, like we talked about earlier, you're only getting one kind of type of organic matter coming into your system. And the shallow roots are less than ideal. Getting more deeper rooting plants, for example, some native warm season grasses, which have really, really deep roots, that extends the carbon that's going deep into your soil. It makes for just a much bigger rhizosphere area, rhizosphere being the area around the plant roots. This is one of the hot spots of microbial activity in soil. That's where a lot of their food is. That's where a lot of the microbes are going to live, make a living, and be converting this organic matter or converting plant inputs back into soil organic matter. That's kind of your storage locker for future seasons. So lawns are not the most ideal thing, but I have one. So, I can't come out too hard again. I'm slowly trying to take it away.
What are you doing?
My husband is kind of resistant to it. So
yeah, I see that.
Likes the lawn. So
yeah. Well, I mean, what options are there for people? Because all right, let's just let nature take its course. A few years go by, I imagine you're going to start getting a lot of complaints from the neighbors, or people think you're decomposing inside, and that's why no one's touched this thing in a while. Are there things I've heard in the past that even things like having plants that are native to your area rather than importing in I'm in Wisconsin, let's see if we can make a palm tree grow in here, and then I bet I'll get a lot of compliments on that palm tree, and then in California or whatever, they're bringing trees from Wisconsin because everyone wants to have the different, like, exotic plant or whatever to show off, but what about just even including some of the native plants in the area and doing it? What if people are looking to spruce up, because there has to be a way to make your landscape look good, maybe even more interesting than your neighbors, while doing it in a maybe I don't even need to say eco-friendly, a slightly more eco-friendly way than the standard kind of clear cutting. What do you have any ideas?
Yeah, no, you bring up native plants, and that's a great and easy thing that you can do around your house. And native plants are great because they're adapted to your area already. So you don't have to overcompensate with extra watering or extra fertilizer typically, because they like growing there. They're adapted to that soil, that climate. If they're growing successfully in that area, they probably are resistant to pests that are in your area. Mm-hmm. So you don't need to baby them as much as some
and they're being pollinated naturally by the native insects that are in your area. And
right, you're promoting native pollinator and bird and wildlife that are all used to eating and using those resources. So it's kind of a win-win both for you as a homeowner, because you don't have to spend as much worrying about whether this thing is going to be successful in your yard. But it also has all these additional benefits for the larger ecosystem. And I am starting to see more landscape designers using natives and being interested in using native landscaping and still making it beautiful. There's a lot of really, really special native plants that just need a little more promotion.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, this is a very scary thing for me to ask you, but can you tell us a little bit about explain microbes a bit and microbi. So just a little background. I don't know anything about chemistry. It scares me. It's just one of those fields. And microbiology kind of falls in that. I have an easy time understanding like bigger global systems, and I spend a lot of time talking about mammals and human behavior, that sort of thing. And when it gets down to the very, very small, that's when I really don't know much of anything at all, but I'm interested.
So microbes are microscopic organisms.
Mhm.
We tend to focus on the single cells, the bacteria and archaea. And you say you kind of like to think about things in a bigger scale.
Mhm.
But ironically, even though I'm a microbiologist, I do too. I'm just thinking about the processes, these large scale, these global processes that are mediated by these tiny, tiny organisms. So,
Like
I'm
what?
not always thinking about them on that microscopic scale.
Oh, good. Well, then we can be friends.
I mean, ironically, I study microbes, but rarely use a microscope. That's not one of the things in our wheelhouse.
All right. That's the whole thing I've been scared about this whole time. Like, oh man, I'm going to have to understand things at a microscopic level.
No, and I would say the only thing you really need to appreciate about microbes, and other microbiologists are probably going to not like
get
how
so much
oversimplified
hate mail from the many microbiologists I have listening right now.
But they're organisms just like everything else on the planet, and so they have the exact same fundamental need to grow and reproduce, right? Every other organism on the planet does that. Microbes are no different either. They spend most of their little lives swimming or just hanging out somewhere, trying to get food, get resources, get energy, so that they can make more of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And it's not any different than any other organism.
Right.
Single cells, so it's a little bit more of a simplistic process. But at its core, it's the same. They consume things to make more of themselves, to grow. They take in energy to fuel those processes, just like we do.
Mm-hmm.
And hope to reproduce more than their neighbor so that they can outcompete them.
What about, there's actually, it seems like there's becoming a public interest in the microbiome and the gut biome. These are things that, for someone who's been interested in science for, some time, and a little frustrated that, I guess we all probably want people to appreciate the things that we appreciate. But it's interesting how much I see just in regular pop culture over the last, especially 5 years or so, lots of microbiome talk, lots of gut biome talk. What's going on with that? Why is this all of a sudden kind of becoming this field people are getting interested in? Is it related to, I know it's often related to nutrition. Was there something that happened? Was there like a book that came out that everyone got excited about? Or was it just, it eventually, as people became more and more mindful about their health or what they were eating? What's going on with that?
A lot of that is actually just because of methodology. So most microbes can't be grown in a lab. Depending who you ask, that estimate varies, but something like 95 to 99% of organisms that live out there in the world can't be grown in the lab. So we don't know a whole lot about them. And I don't think we even really appreciated how many were out there until we started doing high throughput sequencing. So we started with DNA sequencing to investigate microbes. That started in the 70s already. Mm-hmm. And that work, which was done by a famous scientist by the name of Carl Woese, revealed to us when he started using DNA sequences from the environment to look at, what things were out there, he realized that there was way more diversity out there than we had accounted for based on what we had in the lab or what we had observed previously. So there's all these DNA sequences out there of things that we don't know what they are. They're totally new. So that really revolutionized our thinking about how much diversity was out there. And then from the 70s through I would say up until about the early 2000s, mid 2000s, we were using sequencing to investigate microbes, but just because of the methods, we weren't getting a lot of sequences in a single sample. So we might be looking at 100, maybe 200 sequences would be a pretty big sample back then. Mm-hmm. And then in the mid 2000s came the advent of high throughput sequencing. So there was a couple companies that had different technologies, but it allowed us to start to go from hundreds of sequences per samples to thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, and now we're at millions of reads per sequences or per wow. sample. So we could dive into the diversity of DNA sequences in a sample at a depth that we had just never been able to do before. Mm. So once we could do that, we could go back to all these environments that we suspected to have a lot of interesting microbes, like our guts, like the soil, like the deep ocean. We could go back to these and actually get a lot of sequence information and start to piece together all the microorganisms that were living there that didn't match anything we had in culture. So I think that was one of the key steps forward in terms of generating this interest into microbiome research. Mm. And then once we started doing that, we actually had the data and we had the statistical power to start to link changes to the types of microbes, say in our guts, to diet, to health, to whatever your question was. So it was really this advent in technology that allowed us to start asking questions and get the data in a deep enough way to actually answer some of those things. And of course, like anything, as soon as you start answering one question, you've got 20 more to look at.
Right. I mean, it is so fascinating just to think of on kind of a microbial level. We have just like this, a single human has this whole multiverse of all of these different systems, and there's all these symbiotic relationships, and it's all just been so fine-tuned over time. And what even are we? Am I just bacteria collective? What is this? And but even just you go to the grocery store and now everyone's just like, well, I need probiotics. I gotta get kombucha or I'm gonna die. I'm a big boocher. I got on the booch train years ago. I can't say that I've noticed a big difference that I can specifically attribute to kombucha. I enjoy the way that it tastes, and often, I'm always suspicious whenever organic or cage-free or whatever. Like I am always like, love the idea. And is that really what's going on, or is this just some form of advertisement? Is this just some buzzword that's being used that's hot right now? Is the probiotic? Sorry, I'm talking with a soil scientist here. I don't mean to but just because it's connecting with something that's popular in the culture right now. Is the probiotic stuff, is it important? Is it being oversold? Is it somewhere in the middle? You got any thoughts on it?
I'm not as familiar with that area of research.
That's fine. You're less about keeping people alive, more about what happens when they die, and then.
Right. I think a lot about what those microbes are doing after their host is dead. So I don't know as much about the.
Oh, that's stuff, totally fine. I'm actually way more interested in what happens when I die too. So first of all. This is like, I was always going cremation route. I think the whole casket, I never had an interest in that. But now I think, throw me actually in the ground somewhere, put me out in a field. Are people doing that? Are people like, stick me under this tree? I always liked that tree. Is that a thing people are asking for these days?
Absolutely is.
Oh, that's the way that I'm going then. I want to be a tree. All right, break it down for me. What's going to happen? First off, I mean, it's the money you save on a casket it's going into like timing out. Like I want to be dumped off like right under, because I want the whole experience. I don't want anything to be wasted. So I want to fall over under a tree, and then what happens from there? What's the first steps that start happening?
So the first thing that happens after you die, because your heart stops pumping, is you start losing oxygen to all of your cells. Okay. When cells are starved of oxygen, they start basically committing cell suicide, or something called autolysis. But they start breaking down. So they start breaking themselves down. So your tissues start breaking down fairly soon after death. And while that's going on, your gut microbes, so we were just talking about.
Do you mind if I stop you just for a second there? When you say cell suicide, what does that mechanism actually look like in a cell? Like, how does it? What's the difference between being out of resources and just falling apart or whatever, and actually like a cell suicide? You make it seem like an intention, like there's some mechanism going. No, this is the self-destruct mode. Because is it to like try to help the other cells that are living? What's happening there?
So I'm not a cell death expert, but yes, cells do have mechanisms. They produce special enzymes, and they basically shut down and purposely kill themselves. And this happens all the time, even in your living body. When a cell, I don't know. I don't know why or how, but it gets a signal that it's not wanted or not needed anymore. And it'll
I was like, all right.
Yeah, and then a new one grows in its place. So I think this is a really normal part of cellular mechanics. Right. But again, that's a little bit outside of.
That's fine.
What I work on.
That's fine.
But yeah, so you have your cells in the body are starting to kind of bust open and break down. And then at the same time, the microbes that are in your gut primarily, and you have microbes everywhere, but a lot of them are concentrated in your gut. And all these microbes that you've been feeding with kombucha and keeping super happy your whole life, they turn on you after you die. So they can sense, and the mechanism of this is not fully understood, but they can kind of sense that the host defenses are down. Normally your gut microbes are kept in check because of your immune system, right? We don't want the Clostridia in our lower intestines getting out into the rest of our body. When that happens, it's called sepsis, and it's really terrible. So when we're alive, our body works really hard to keep microbes where they're supposed to be. After death, those mechanisms are shut down. We don't have the immune response anymore. The microbes in our guts can kind of grow at will, and they start to bloom and go kind of crazy, because now they have all this extra food resources from your tissues that are breaking down. All these dead cells now are food for your gut microbes. So they start eating on those.
These traders.
They do.
So there's in our living life, there's just this constant war going on of our immune system keeping these things in check.
Yeah.
I was picturing it as more of like a peace and love, holding hands, working symbiotically together, but this is a full on things are being kept in check. Well,
they're good for us, and they do work really well for us as long as they stay in the GI tract.
Yeah.
We just want to make sure they don't step out of their cubicle, right?
Yeah.
You gotta keep them in place.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I have a sepsis expert I've had on to talk about COVID a few times. I'm going to have her back on to actually get into sepsis a little bit more. But yeah,
cool.
Go on.
Yeah. So after death, it's kind of a similar scenario to sepsis, where the gut microbes can kind of grow unchecked, and they have all these new resources. They're mostly anaerobic bacteria. So that means they're using a lot of anaerobic decomposition, fermentation type pathways. And this produces a lot of gases. And so so oftentimes a dead body will start to bloat. These gases sort of fill up and balloon out. If you're buried under a tree, you might not get so much because of just the pressure of the soil. But if you're on the surface, body sort of distends as these gases are building up. And the tissues are slowly being converted over to fluids, basically.
Yeah, I do. But just to clarify, sorry to interrupt, but I don't. Yeah, I also have changed things. I don't want to be buried under. I want the full experience. I want.
You want the full surface.
I want to just wheelbarrow. Yeah, I want to dissolve into the ground. I want the worms. If there's worms, great. I know that's like not everyone gets the worms. But that's what we think about, and that's the cliche in every cartoon and everything. And I'm rooting for the worms, but I'll keep my expectations low.
Yeah. So, if you're on the surface, they'll probably be bloating. You sort of blow up a little bit. I'm glad you brought up invertebrates, because as long as the temperatures are above about 50 degrees or so, you'll get fly species that like to oviposit or lay their eggs inside dead bodies. The body becomes an incubator for their larvae.
So you want a nice warm day if you're trying to really be a source of life.
If you like the insect, the entomological aspect of decomposition, then I would recommend at least above 50 degrees when flies are more active.
Helpful to know.
Yeah. So they'll lay their eggs. Those the larvae or the maggots feed on tissues as they're growing. That's their primary nutrition source. So that helps break down and liquefy those tissues as well. And at some point, all of this usually becomes a little bit too much for the body to contain. And there's some sort of release of the gas and fluids. That's the
grand finale. That's the fireworks show. No.
Well, so I think it changes. So up to that point, it's mostly your gut microbes that are involved. Once things kind of split open and become much more exposed to the environment, environmental microbes can get in on the action. Ooh. So now you have soil and environmental microbes coming from the outside in, getting into all these spaces that are now opened up.
Now we're truly becoming one with the earth.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Before that, it was just the GI, the microbiomes. The parents left for the weekend, and they threw a party, and everything was great. And then now it's a disaster. But now.
Right. Now the neighbors are coming in. They've heard the party, and they're coming to join in.
Great.
Yeah, and so this is when what's really kind of fascinating to me about this very strange ecosystem is that you have this collision of two microbial communities that don't normally spend a lot of time together, right? You've got soil microbes on one hand and your gut microbes on the other, and usually they're in very separate spaces, but now they're all in the same space. They are using this body as a food source. They're breaking down and cycling those nutrients back into the environment. And one of the things we're doing in my lab is still trying to resolve what that collision, what the outcome of that collision is. Are these microbes competing for the same resources? Are they doing separate things? Are they cooperating? Is it kind of like a syntropy type scenario, which means one group is breaking down a molecule which provides a food for another group, so kind of like a
cascade
chain reaction,
Yeah.
the cascade, exactly. So we're trying to still understand all of the successional processes that are happening in this very dynamic ecosystem.
It is strange because we're mentioning it again, but we kind of brought this up with the whale, the bottom of the ocean stuff in the very beginning. How are these things so well adapted for such a rare event? Is it just that they have such a kind of diverse toolkit that they can jump on and exploit a wide variety of opportunities that might come about?
Yeah, so I mean that's a great question. I would first say that it's not as rare as you would think. It's not as consistent, say, as maybe leaf litter that falls in a forest.
Right.
But animals die all the time. They're usually decomposed and consumed pretty quickly, so we don't see them. When we're out on a hike, we don't usually see a lot of dead animals. But they do. I mean, animals are always around, and they do die. So there's enough that for specialized species, say like blowflies, which like to lay their eggs in carcasses, there's enough around that those species can kind of make a living and survive, right? They're always going to find the next carcass. They have very highly developed sense of, it's not smell, but they're able to detect the decomposing carcass and find the next host. But for the microbes, especially the soil microbes, it's more just that they are so adaptable. If you live in soil, if that's your dominant habitat, you have to be used to huge swings in moisture as the soil dries and wets. You get a rainfall, you're totally soaked. You get a drought, you're totally dry. Huge swings in nutrients coming and going, swings in temperature, swings in chemistry, all the things I talked about at the top with the gradients in soil. So microbes that live in soil are really well adapted to as a community, really well adapted to these changing conditions. And so that they can, when the right resources are there, take advantage of those. The other thing I would argue is that the resource of a carcass or a dead body is not the molecules are not that unusual, right? So it's proteins, it's DNA, it's carbohydrates. So these are things that the microbes are used to getting anyways. It's not like they need any sort of new metabolism to break these things down. It's just put in a new form and in a different concentration than maybe they would normally see in leaf litter.
So are there different things going after different? Because I really want I want different things going after my eyeballs that are crawling into my ears, and then some other things get real excited about my liver, and then some things are like my bones a lot. Is it like that, or is it just like a big soup of everything going on at once?
We're starting to see that there are specialized groups of microbes. So the ones in the soil are, I think they're mostly getting the soft tissues, the goo. And so that seems to be one group. We see slightly different microbes that are on the skin versus inside your gut. And then we find even a different group of microbes on the bones afterwards. So microbes will inhabit and colonize the bones at the end of all this. And that's a different group again. And we think that's a group that's probably better adapted for making a living in bone, which is a little bit different than those other environments. So we are starting to see evidence that there's specialized groups that take out some of these different things. I don't know about the eyeballs, though. Those are usually first to go, and so we've never studied the eyeballs.
It's just so juicy. There's just something going on. Everything, and that's it. That's again, the cartoons or whatever must have nailed it. I imagine when you like back in the day, you'd come across a corpse, you'd see a maggot crawling out of an eye, and that image probably stuck with you enough that you'd tell people about it, and then it became kind of a thing in culture where everyone knows, well, things start crawling in and out of your eyeballs when you die, and that's how you draw it in whatever cartoon. What about, when is the party over? You said kind of like a month or so, but it's got to be that first, it's probably not, well, the first day is really great for like your insides, I would think, it sounds like. And then like following day, a few days in, that's when you start, the neighbors start having some fun too. Everyone's real excited at this point still. And then when's everyone like, all right, kind of fun's over, there's a little bit left. That's probably in the like 3-4 week range when things start calming down.
Yeah. I mean, it depends on the temperature, but in hot temperatures, that will, most of the soft tissue will be decomposed and consumed somewhere around the 3 to 4 to 5 week mark. And so, that's when you've got your gut microbes, you've got the environmental microbes. They're very active. In fact, we call it active decay because that's when you see the most rapid mass loss in the carcass or in the body. That's when most of the tissue is either being consumed or liquefying and seeping into the soil. And so that peters out when a lot of the really easy to use resources are gone. So when a lot of that really juicy, nutritious stuff has been used up, things are going to start to slow down because then you're just left with the things that are a little bit harder to eat. There's still definitely microbes that will break those compounds down. I'm thinking like sometimes skin can get, if it dries out and mummifies, it can get a little bit hard to break down just because it's really dry. Keratin, like in your fingernails and hair, some of these harder to break down molecules, your bones, of course. And so microbes are breaking those down, but much more slowly, just because they're much more recalcitrant molecules. They're just harder they take a lot longer to break down. So that's a period we call advanced decay. When most of the soft tissue is gone, you're left with bones, hair, and then maybe some tough tissue left over at the end. And then that period of time can extend for quite a long time. It's sort of like the slow tail end of decomposition until you're fully skeletonalized.
Where's that tough tissue? Where's that on the body? What's that last little?
Well, it's usually tissues that just have dried out too much, and that could just be from like say it was sitting in the sun and it gets really hot and kind of bakes. And if it dries out too much, so one of the things these microbes, like all life on Earth, needs is moisture, is water. Yeah. And so if you take away that, then it doesn't break down.
One of the things. Oh, sorry. What,
I was
one of the,
going to point out a great example of that is like the Egyptian mummies, right, which are stored in this very arid environment with no moisture, and they've sort of stuck around an awful long time.
Yeah. Well, one of my I love thinking about perception, the variety of perception that different life on all of our perceptions are kind of adapted to different needs, or all of life's various perceptions, and I really always thought that dung beetles are kind of a really nice example of this, as this big pile of dung, which is if you're a large mammal or something, it makes all sorts of sense for evolution to have all of these disgust mechanisms go off to make you averse to going anywhere near anything that looks, smells like. We don't need to try seeing what that tastes like. We're gonna just stay away from that. But if you're a dung beetle, this pile of dung is like, this could be your new home. This is your mating ground. This is like, you're gonna raise your children here. This is your bachelor pad. This is the best thing that you've ever seen. And there has to be kind of similar stuff going on that nice hot day where like in that first couple days of where if you're a human coming by, you're going, what the heck is that? Makes sense to be averse to the smell and anything that looks or smells like rotten meat. If you're a carnivore, probably you want to stay away from it and have a lot of adaptation, be well adapted for a lot of high alerts for any cues of that. But if you're one of these insects, that's probably just that's your version of like a nice smelling rose or something like that. What kind of insects are coming in once you get like a real nice like a thick like death musk going on like day 2?
Yeah, so usually the primary colonizers, blowflies are one of the more common insects. So these are the ones that'll come in and lay their eggs, and they're not even, they don't even wait till day 2. They're often within hours of death. It's really remarkable how fast they can find a new resource.
That is amazing. Yeah.
Isn't that amazing? I don't know why, or I don't know how that works, but they can.
And you said they're laying eggs somewhere too when they do. Okay.
Yeah, they lay eggs in the body.
Okay.
So they usually go for orifices. So in the eyes, one of the reasons the eyes go first, eyes, mouth, ears, and other holes.
Yeah, and then you have this explosion of larvae, this explosion of life coming out of all of your holes.
Yes. So you described this
amazing
pop culture image of like a single maggot. Usually a writhing mass.
I love a good writhing mass.
You can hear it. You can stand above the body and like hear it squish, and it's moving around and generates an incredible amount of heat too. So you can actually, put your hand over it and feel the heat coming off this writhing massive maggots. But then you get all kinds of other insects that come in, because it turns out maggots are delicious. And so you have other beetles and wasps that'll come in and feed on those maggots and other parts of the resource. So there's a whole community of insects that make a living off of that.
Amazing.
And then we haven't even really talked about the scavengers either. There's all kinds of animals that love dead, rotting meat.
Yeah.
Take advantage of that. Again, great resource for food. So there's birds and mammals that
they always get a bad rap.
As scavengers, they do get a bad rap, but they're so important because they are, again, cleaning up and redistributing all these dead things that would just, we think are kind of waste or nasty in the landscape. They can make a living off of it.
So you got your vultures, your number one archetype. Everyone everyone knows what they're up to. Everyone's creeped out, but I think they're fantastic. They're weird look. I love how weird looking they are. I like that they're aesthetically kind of ugly in a way that's beautiful. I think it's they're like intensely ugly by like normal human perception standards or something, and there's something like very intriguing about the way that they look. What else you got? What else is swooping in? I didn't even think about that. I didn't even think about all the big things that might swoop in and eat me. This is like a whole, I just want to be a buffet. I can't believe I almost just cremated my core. It's like, it's such a waste.
You're missing out. Think of all the life you could be feeding and all the different, your carbon could be redistributed into thousands of different organisms.
This is,
How cool is that?
That's amazing. That's so cool. I mean, you do get to keep on living. You're living in all of these various things. A lot of them gross by our standards, sure, but yeah, that's so. What other large? What do we got like in the kind of vulture realm of things? What's gonna come by and maybe grab a couple bites?
At least around here, vultures are our primary avian scavengers.
Okay.
And then we have mammals like raccoons.
Ooh.
Raccoons are big scavengers around here.
Okay. Yeah. I like that. Yeah, raccoons. That's there's kind of a little bit of a pet raccoon craze going on right now. Yeah, I mean it's no, you haven't missed out. It's just bubbling. It's like it's like I'm the person telling you about Bitcoin 5 years ago. Right now, that's like where raccoons are heading. Put all your money in raccoon business, like specialty, like pet shops and like little raccoon shirts and stuff. That's where that's where there's a lot of interest in the pet raccoons. But yeah, that's
very cool animals. So I get that.
They are. They can climb up amazing.
They're so
they can
smart.
get into unlocking. I used to live in a brick redstone in Boston, and I don't know if it was just climbing straight up the brick. I don't even understand how it happened. I'd have garbage out on the back deck, and it would put locks on it and everything. Forget it. The thing would climb straight up brick, I think, unless it was somehow getting up this fire escape situation, and then it would unlock things, and it would get into whatever, and it always knew like exactly what it was going for. Love a raccoon, and they're cute for a bunch of things that dig in garbage. They are pretty darn cute. All right, well, I'm gonna have to get a raccoon researcher on. It's becoming evident to me from this conversation. I get a little distracted sometimes. I'm kind of excitable.
That's okay.
All right. So what are that was a fun. Thanks for taking us on that voyage of what happens after we die. If we do it the correct way, which we've now learned is falling over on the ground somewhere and decomposing there. That's the right way to do it. What are some of what's your average kind of day look like? What kind of tools are you using, and how do you do the work that you do?
So when we're doing research at the body farm,
wait, can I stop for a second? What is the body farm?
Oh, it's the nickname that we give to, it's formally called the Anthropology Research Facility.
Okay.
And
body
somewhere
farm
along the way, it got the nickname Body Farm.
If you guys start a band, you'll be all set.
Right?
Yeah.
Right? Well, and it was one of those things where I think I'm not sure the people who ran it loved that nickname. Their argument to me was always we don't grow bodies. We're not a body farm. But I think they've embraced it now. It's just become such it's become a familiar term in pop culture to call these facilities body farms. So a typical day, if it's a field sampling day for us, we head over to the facility, which is actually pretty close to campus. We don't have to go too far from the University of Tennessee campus. Get into PPE. So usually booty covers and Tyvek pants and gloves and all that good stuff that we have to be careful of when we're dealing with human remains. And then we'll have any number of experiments going on where we have human bodies in various states of decay around the facility. If we're interested in looking at the microbes on the body, we might collect them using swabs and put them in tubes to bring them back to the lab. If we're looking at the soil microbes, we usually use some sort of coring device to take soil samples and get it back to the lab. When we're out there, we usually check on any instrumentation that we have set up. So we often have sensors that are recording temperature, moisture, humidity, so that we can keep track of all those environmental variables, because those all control the rate of decomposition. So it helps us compare one event to another. Then we get those samples back to the lab. We might measure various chemical or physical parameters of the soil. So we might measure, for example, the amount of ammonium, which is a form of nitrogen that's very dominant in these soils. All of our proteins are breaking down to ammonium, so we'll measure concentrations like that. We might measure carbon in the soil. And then if we're interested in looking at the microbes, what we'll do is we'll extract DNA, nucleic acids, from that soil and sequence it to look at the types of microbes that are in those communities. And we'll go back day after day. The big advantage of these body farm facilities is that they allow you to do longitudinal studies to try and understand that cascade, that succession of microbial populations, who's, where, when, and how does that correlate to the environment around them.
So if I have a new plan and I want to be science when I die, I keel over tomorrow. I have it in my will. I'm like, I want to be in the body ranch. Ship me over there. What happens? How do you get these bodies in the first place? This is just someone that's done this very thing.
Yes. So each of the body farm facilities around the country maintains their own donor program. So you would register with the facility that you would want your body to end up in. The one at UT here is the longest running and probably the most famous of all the facilities. It's been running for close to 40 years, around 40 years. And it's just really well known. It's been featured in popular media. There's been books written about it. So I think it's pretty well known, and it's certainly a local source of pride. So people around here know about it and are really proud of the fact that this is kind of a famous facility here. So they never really have problems getting donors. They have somewhere around 4,000 people that have pre-registered to donate their body to the facility after they die.
Specifically to the facility.
Specifically to this facility.
Wow.
Yeah.
I would have never.
Yeah.
I thought you just checked like, give me to science, and then they're like, and then science is gonna fight over the, like, someone that studies the decomposition of red beards is like, we need that one, and then they do whatever. But this is specifically so that's amazing. So you can figure out, so because I don't listen, guys, any listeners, I'm not trying to sell you necessarily on Jennifer DeBruyn's body plantation, but do your research. I'm an advocate for science, obviously, if you gave your body to science, but that's so like take a look around. Now I got to have more guests that will do different things with people's corpses so I can give people a little taste of their options. But so you're just well known in the area. A lot of people they know about the body vineyard, and they're like, that's where I want to ship me over there. And you're just up to their eyeballs in corpse. You get 4,000 a year. Is that what you said?
No, there's 4,000 pre-registered. So these are living people that have filled in the paperwork. What's nice about that is that we can collect data from when they're alive, and we collect information about them when they're alive, so that we can better understand maybe how some of those parameters affect decomposition after they die. So at the facility, they get somewhere around 100 donors are actually put into the facility each year for decomposition. Amazing. And then what I think is also really neat about it is that after decomposition is done, and that research has been done, the skeletons are actually collected, and they go into a skeletal collection here at UT as well for further biological anthropology research. So students can use those skeletons to measure all the things that biological anthropologists love to measure about bones and things.
Wow. Do they ever we have enough skeletons. We actually don't even need any more. You guys have delivered so many skeletons, or will they're always going to find a use for it?
I don't know. I don't know if they turn away skeletons. I do know sometimes they turn away donors for logistic reasons.
What kind of anchorage do you guys have at the estate? How big is this facility?
It's not very big.
Okay.
It's only a couple acres, so it's pretty dense in there. So one of the things actually we're kind of interested in is how 40 years of putting bodies in the same place, how that's changed the soil. So actually one of our current research projects is looking at what changes we can see in the soil from all of this repeated high nitrogen resources, which is it's really quite artificial.
You're probably creating new things, right?
You
got new things that haven't existed before. That's incredible. You're creating fun little alien life forms in your.
Well, possibly.
Oh, I love it. Gosh, this is so cool. So, all right. Well, so you talked about just the last little bit as we're wrapping up, and I only say that we're wrapping up just in case there was any loose ends that you were hoping to get back to or whatever. Feel free to interject. We should probably plug the One Health initiative as well, and kind of how what you do intersects with all of the other folks in the group. But after all that, did I just go and forget my big last question? Oh my goodness gracious. This is what it was. It was so you have all this incredible DNA stuff, and you're going from able to sequence 10 things to 1,000,000 things. What new technologies are on the horizon? What if people hear this podcast, and for whatever reason they're just like, well, this is I've never cared about anything so much. I need to get more resources to this body farm. What are you looking forward to in the future where's the direction that your field's heading? What are the exciting things on the horizon?
Well, I think one of the key questions we're trying to answer right now is trying to figure out the variation in bodies and how that affects decomposition. So we've long known that temperature and moisture are really important for controlling how fast decomposition happens, how long and what processes take place. And that makes sense. It just controls biology. Temperature and moisture are kind of key controls on biology. But what we've kind of noticed anecdotally, just working out there for years, is that we can take two donors and put them down side by side, same local environment, same weather, same temperature, same moisture, and they'll decompose at really different rates. And in some cases, they'll be scavenged at very different rates. So one of the things we've noticed is that it seems that diabetic people are scavenged more than non-diabetic people. And so this is hinting to us that it doesn't just matter the outside climate, but it also matters the state of our bodies. And so whether that's a body composition thing, how much fat versus protein or muscle tissue we have, whether it's a weight, just a mass effect, whether it's due to the different drugs that we take. If we're on antibiotics, we know that shifts our gut microflora. Would that influence the decomposition downstream? Is it due to diet? Do omnivores decompose different than vegans? I don't know. And so far we've kind of been limited in answering these questions because of sample sizes. It's challenging to work with human donors. There's a lot of logistical challenges to doing that. And so historically, these types of studies have used very small sample sizes, maybe only 2 or 3 bodies in an experiment. And that's not enough to tease apart whether gender matters. I don't know. Well, we just don't have the sample size to say whether different people, different body chemistries decompose differently.
Man, well, I hope I'm a good decomposer. I mean, I'd like to do something right. I'm not diabetic. Do you ever, are you starting to get a sense of, because what I would think, and this is probably so silly, but my intuition would be like, you have some like frail, like 100-year-old person that lived this very long life and then they finally end up in the body farm. I would think a lot of things are like, that body was started dying like 15 years ago, and a lot of the work's already been done. Whereas like you have a virile young man like me, 40 years old. I mean, look at this skin. This is like, I could see bacteria and stuff just really getting into this. And do you have a sense of anything like that?
It's an awesome question, because we do know that our body changes both in composition and in tissues as we age. Things do get different. So maybe, but we don't know. So one of the limitations is with doing these experiments is we rely on donations, right? We don't get to pick the humans that we do experiments with. And we certainly don't get to manipulate the humans that we do experiments with. That's a no-go whenever you do human research of any sort, right? So we're completely reliant on just what comes into the facility. And the majority of donors we get are older. So we do pretty much all our research on people that are over 60 years old.
Well, you don't start thinking about death until that time. I'm getting a jump on it today. I don't want to put this off. So, sorry, I cut you off again. I just get very excited. But okay, so what? Like I'm in Wisconsin, right? Like what? Can you be? You don't need to be local. If I check a little, if I sign up for your thing, if they'll ship me to you no matter where I keel over.
No, they'll pick up within a certain radius, in a local radius. Outside of that, you would have to pay for shipping. But
Okay.
there's lots of other options out there. There's if you don't go with a body farm, there are we're seeing more and more natural cemeteries, which are nice forested areas or landscaped areas.
Oh, that's so
and we'll
cool.
just wrap people in a simple shroud and bury them under a tree, kind of like you want.
Oh, the
And
shroud's
the
the shroud's a nice touch, I will say
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, well, just for some,
Yeah, a little
just sort of shoveling
presentation.
it in.
Yeah.
There is Washington State just legalized human composting, so that's another option for environmentally friendly death care.
Oh, wow. How
yeah.
self-sufficient you could be if you have your own compost already. Can you just be like, I want to go in my own pile? That's a legal thing to do. I could write that and be.
I don't know the details of it. I'm not sure if you're allowed to do it in your own backyard. I'm not up on that and don't speak on the record about that. But I do know they have at least one commercial facility that is up and running now.
So interesting.
And they are offering human composting as an end of life option.
What about? Oh, sorry. Go on. I'm so interested.
I was just going to say, this is something I love to see this come to be a thing, because we've long used it for livestock, dead livestock and animals. We use composting. It's a really nice, clean, quick way to break down a body that maybe can't go into the food system for whatever reason. There's no smell, no insects, no scavengers if you do it the right way. It's just a 2 or 3 week composting and it's gone.
I love this.
Very
man.
efficient and green way to do it, because your body is turning back into organic carbon into soil.
So literally listeners can just be like, they can just Google how to human compost near me. And
I think Washington State's the only one that's
okay. All right
now.
Well, we need change.
Encourage listeners to check with your state laws with respect
and
to
vote for. I'm now a single issue voter. Is this politician for or against?
But a lot of people think that after you die, you have to go to a funeral home and you have to use a casket and you have to be in a grave.
That is so silly. It's so silly. I've legitimately, like, all kidding aside, which I'm not kidding that much. It might be funny, but I'm also being pretty serious. But I've always been against the cemetery. Like I just don't get it. I mean, I get it from a grieving ritualistic thing, but I don't get it from like what I would actually want my body to be like taking up space and for no reason.
Right. A lot of times that's some of our best land, and we could use that maybe to.
Yeah, I don't know what I don't mean to like give people a hard time over it, but it just, I think a lot of people don't even know this is an opportunity. Well, okay, I'm gonna like, let's say I sign up because I trust you with my corpse. We know each other. I show up like, oh hey Shane, oh, okay, well that's he was a man of his word. But when if I fill out the form or whatever, I go, you would start studying me now. Like I would get like some surveys or something, or what am I sending samples? You would start, because you said you collect data on the living.
So as far as I understand right now, it's mostly limited to medical information, and it's really voluntary. It's just, we ask you to keep us in the loop on what's going on with you, so that we know, especially because we're starting to ask these questions about how diseases or drugs or lifestyle might influence decomposition. We're starting to pay more attention to some of the data that's collected for the donors before they get to us.
Going back to something that I had this question. It does seem pretty important, and I think it maybe loops nicely into One Health. But you mentioned when we were talking about these death events where all of a sudden there's just this corpse party out in a forest somewhere, and how the heck is all of this environment ready to jump on that opportunity? You mentioned that it's actually not that rare of an event that squirrel or a deer or whatever, a raccoon is fallen over. But I imagine it's becoming increasingly more rare with the loss of biodiversity. Is there some impact on as we're losing just biodiversity loss in terms of mammals and everything else? Is that then having a impact on, because we talked about farms and monocultures, but what about the diversity in just a regular old out in the woods when there's no longer as many deer around or whatever mammals that are turning into nutrients in soil when they die? Is that having an impact?
Yeah, we think so. So we think that, so if you're changing animal patterns and animal diversity, there's a couple things that can happen with that diversity loss. You might have change in animal migration patterns or animal population distribution. So it might change where animals are and where animals are dying. We do think we're seeing an uptick in animal mass mortality events, particularly related to climate change events. We have more extreme events generally, and some of these can lead to mass mortality events. But we also think that as animal populations are changing, we've thought about this a little bit more on the scavenger side of things, but if you're changing from, say, having some large top predators like wolves as scavengers to maybe some meso-scavengers like foxes and raccoons, that might have implications for how fast those nutrients are recycled or where those nutrients are recycled. So you think of a raccoon home range is a lot smaller than, say, a wolf home range. So where the nutrients are getting consumed and then ultimately sort of changed to over a landscape. So we do think that changes in biodiversity will affect how and where carcass nutrients are recycled and distributed. But I'm not sure we have really good handle on what that all means just yet. But it's something we're definitely thinking about.
And could you just kind of tell listeners what the One Health initiative is?
Sure. So the One Health initiative here at UT is uniting a lot of scientists that have already been working in various areas of plant, animal, human, and environmental health, and kind of recognizing that these problems don't happen in bubbles, that human and animal plant health is influenced by environmental health and vice versa. So it's a really way to kind of unite us around particular problems using kind of this multidisciplinary approach.
Great. Yeah, it's been interesting getting to, because a lot of times I have in mind, if I'm normally I'd be on tour and I'd look up in a university who's kind of doing what, and something would catch my eye, or I'd be on the lookout for something that's kind of in my wheelhouse, and I'd reach out to those people. And it's been interesting getting to explore what it looks like when there's a bunch of different people, kind of getting suggestions from guests of a bunch of people working on all of these different things that might not necessarily be the thing that I would naturally gravitate to, and then finding out the ways that they all interact with one another. And I mean, that's just like the journey of scientific understanding, is you keep on learning more. You need to learn more and more of these things that are usually outside of your comfort zone or knowledge field or whatever, and realize how many the interconnectedness of everything, and so it's been really cool. But yeah, it's been really terrific having you on. Is there anything that you want me to direct listeners to? Do you want them to sign over their corpse to you or anything like that?
Well, we have a long list, but if listeners are interested, they can look at the Forensic Anthropology Center website at UT. I don't have the URL, but if you Google it,
We'll
I'm sure
find
you'll
it.
find it.
Yeah.
The body farm is famous enough. But I would also, just to kind of reiterate what we were talking about earlier, encourage people to think a little bit about what they do want to happen to their body after death, and just realize that there's options there, and some of them, if you're concerned about the environment, there's certainly options that are a little bit more environmentally friendly than others.
Yeah, I was gonna burn it up. I was like, well, I don't want to take up space, burn me up there, and now this is such a better solution.
Well, because
Compost
you get to
me.
go back to organic carbon instead of carbon dioxide, which is a greenhouse gas. So it's a little bit more
Yeah, that's.
So,
Oh
yeah.
man. All right. Well, I'm sold. I'm sold.
all right.
Well, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jennifer DeBruyn, for joining me.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, and thank you, listeners, for being such wonderful, curious people. We'll talk with you next week.